Thursday, 22 March 1945. Dawn breaks over western Germany under a low, cold sky, the kind that presses down on men already stretched to their limits by months of continuous fighting. The Rhine River, long regarded by German planners as a natural defensive barrier that could slow or even halt the Allied advance, now lies behind large elements of the American forces. The crossing that German commanders once believed would buy them time has already been compromised, and the war in Europe is entering its final, most dangerous phase. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the pressure is immense. Every decision now carries consequences that will shape not only the end of World War II, but the political and military balance of post-war Europe. At the center of this pressure sits General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, responsible for coordinating the largest coalition army in history. His task is not simply to defeat Germany, but to manage British, American, Canadian, and French forces in a way that avoids catastrophic risk while maintaining unity among allies with very different doctrines, personalities, and political expectations. Resources are finite, supply lines are strained, and the race toward Berlin is complicated by agreements already made with the Soviet Union. Eisenhower's greatest challenge is not the collapsing German army in front of him, but controlling the ambitions and instincts of his own commanders. One of those commanders, General George S. Patton, is already moving. Patton's Third Army, positioned south of the Ruhr, has crossed the Rhine earlier than many planners expected, exploiting weak German resistance and improvising river crossings with a speed that alarms as much as it impresses higher headquarters. Officially, Third Army is supposed to pause, consolidate, and wait for further instructions, while the Northern and Central Allied armies complete their own carefully planned advances. Unofficially, Patton sees something very different unfolding on the ground. German units are retreating in confusion. Command structures are fractured. Roads that intelligence reports once marked as heavily defended are nearly empty. To Patton, every hour of delay is an hour the enemy might use to recover. The advance that follows is not fully authorized. Patton does not issue a dramatic declaration or openly defy Eisenhower. Instead, he does what he has always done best. He interprets orders aggressively, pushes reconnaissance forward beyond prescribed limits, and allows success to dictate further movement. Tanks roll east. Infantry follows close behind. Engineers throw bridges across rivers that German planners never expected the Allies to reach so soon. Supply officers are told to make it work, no matter how uncomfortable it becomes. Within days, Third Army is operating well beyond the boundaries envisioned in the original operational plan. At Eisenhower's headquarters, reports begin to arrive that make staff officers uneasy. Maps are updated with new front lines that advance faster than expected, sometimes faster than adjacent Allied units can match. Patton's spearheads are creating bulges in the Allied front, raising fears of exposed flanks and overextended supply routes. British officers, already wary of Patton's reputation for recklessness, begin to voice concerns that his advance could force the rest of the Allied armies to adjust their plans or risk being drawn into an unwanted crisis. The fear is not abstract. World War II has already shown repeatedly how rapid advances can turn into disasters when logistics fail or enemy counterattacks strike vulnerable points. The German Ardennes offensive only months earlier remains fresh in everyone's mind. Eisenhower's command philosophy emphasizes coordination and balance, not individual glory. Patton's unauthorized momentum threatens that balance. Yet the results are undeniable. German prisoners are taken by the tens of thousands. Entire divisions surrender after being bypassed and cut off from supply. Towns fall with little resistance. Intelligence intercepts indicate that German commanders are unsure where the main Allied effort even lies. Patton's speed is not just collapsing frontline resistance, it is eroding the enemy's ability to think coherently about defense. For Eisenhower, This creates a dilemma that will define Patton's legacy in the final months of the war. The unauthorized advance makes Patton feared not only by the Germans, but by his allies. British commanders, particularly Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, view Patton's actions through the lens of coalition warfare. Montgomery's doctrine emphasizes deliberate planning, overwhelming force, and strict adherence to agreed operational frameworks. To him, Patton's behavior is dangerous not because it might fail, but because it might succeed in a way that destabilizes Allied coordination. If one commander can unilaterally reshape the battlefield, what does that mean for unity of command? Within American ranks, reactions are mixed. Some senior officers admire Patton's instincts and believe his actions are shortening the war. Others see a commander who is forcing Eisenhower into reactive decision-making, undermining the very structure that allows a coalition army to function. Patton's subordinates, meanwhile, feel the pressure directly. They are moving faster than supply schedules allow, fighting on little rest and improvising solutions daily. Success is exhilarating, but exhaustion is constant, and mistakes at this tempo can be fatal. Patton himself is acutely aware of the risks, but his worldview leaves little room for hesitation. He believes that German resistance is collapsing irreversibly, and that only Allied caution could prolong the war unnecessarily. His fear is not overextension, but missed opportunity. In his mind, history punishes commanders who stop when the enemy is already falling backward. This belief, forged over decades of study and combat experience, drives him forward even as it deepens mistrust among allies who value control over momentum. As March turns into April, Eisenhower is forced to make a series of decisions shaped directly by Patton's actions. Orders are adjusted after the fact to legitimize gains already made. Other armies are instructed to accelerate their own advances to maintain cohesion. What began as an unauthorized push now influences the operational tempo of the entire Western Front. The irony is unmistakable. Patton's disobedience creates results that cannot be ignored, yet those same results make him increasingly difficult to control. The fear Patton inspires among allies is not rooted in personal animosity alone. It is fear of unpredictability. Coalition warfare depends on trust that commanders will act within agreed boundaries, that risks will be shared, and that no single personality will force others into dangerous situations without consent. Patton challenges that trust by proving, again and again, that unilateral action can succeed spectacularly. For cautious planners, that success is as threatening as failure would have been. German intelligence officers, observing the chaos within their own ranks, begin to identify Patton as the most dangerous Allied commander not because of his resources, but because of his refusal to slow down. Ironically, this assessment mirrors the private fears of some Allied officers. The same qualities that make Patton effective against a collapsing enemy make him unsettling within a coalition that prizes predictability and coordination. As the advance continues, the consequences of Patton's unauthorized momentum ripple outward. Supply priorities are reshuffled. Air support is diverted to cover his spearheads. Strategic discussions about post-war occupation zones are quietly influenced by how far and how fast American forces are moving. Patton's tanks are not just advancing on German soil. They are advancing into political territory already shaped by Allied agreements and Soviet expectations. By early April 1945, it is clear that Patton's actions have permanently altered the final phase of the war in the West. He has not broken Allied command, but he has bent it, forcing Eisenhower and others to adapt to realities created on the ground rather than those envisioned on planning maps. This ability to reshape strategy through action is precisely why Patton is both admired and feared by his allies. He is a commander whose successes generate as many problems as they solve, whose speed creates dilemmas faster than staffs can resolve them. The unauthorized advance becomes a case study in leadership under extreme pressure, where uncertainty, ambition, and opportunity collide. It reveals the fragile balance between discipline and initiative, between coalition unity and individual brilliance. In the final weeks of World War II in Europe, Patton's advance stands as a reminder that wars are not ended solely by plans approved in headquarters, but by decisions made in motion, under pressure, when the consequences of stopping may be just as dangerous as the consequences of moving forward. The deeper Patton's Third Army pushes into central Germany, the more visible the strain becomes at every level of Allied command. Communications that once flowed according to orderly schedules now arrive in bursts, sometimes hours late, sometimes contradicting earlier reports. Eisenhower's staff works long nights reconciling frontline reality with operational plans that no longer reflect the pace of events. Each new map update shows Patton's formations extending farther east and south, threading between collapsing German units and terrain features that planners once expected to become major obstacles. The concern is no longer whether Patton will stop, but whether anyone can meaningfully slow him without risking a breakdown in command authority. German resistance, while visibly weakening, does not disappear. Small but determined pockets of Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS units launch local counterattacks against Patton's flanks, probing for vulnerabilities created by rapid movement. These actions rarely achieve strategic success, but they extract a cost in lives and fuel and force Patton's commanders to make constant, rapid decisions under fire. The pressure on regimental and battalion leaders is immense. They are expected to advance aggressively, secure lines of communication, manage prisoners, and improvise defenses, often simultaneously. Every mile gained increases the complexity of holding what has already been taken. Behind the front lines, Third Army's logistical situation grows increasingly precarious. Fuel convoys struggle to keep pace with armored spearheads that outrun planned supply dumps. Ammunition consumption spikes as units engage scattered but stubborn defenders. Patton responds not by slowing the advance, but by reshaping logistics around momentum. Supply officers are ordered to prioritize forward units at the expense of rear area reserves. Captured German fuel stocks are pressed into service despite uncertainties about quality and compatibility. The entire army operates on the assumption that tomorrow's supplies will be found somehow, somewhere ahead. This approach unsettles Eisenhower's headquarters profoundly. Coalition warfare depends on predictability and logistics, and Patton's improvisation threatens to destabilize supply networks serving multiple armies. British and Canadian commanders express concern that American fuel priorities are being skewed by Patton's unilateral movement. Eisenhower listens carefully, weighing alliance cohesion against battlefield opportunity. Each decision he makes now risks either slowing the war effort or undermining trust among allies, whose cooperation remains essential for the occupation and reconstruction that will follow victory. Patton, for his part, remains largely unmoved by the political dimensions of the problem. His focus is fixed on operational collapse within the German army. Intelligence reports crossing his desk describe units retreating without orders, officers abandoning command posts, and civilians flooding roads in every direction. To Patton, this is the unmistakable signature of an enemy at the breaking point. He believes that hesitation now would allow German commanders time to establish new defensive lines deeper inside the Reich, prolonging the war and increasing casualties on both sides. The psychological impact of Patton's advance becomes evident in prisoner interrogations. German officers repeatedly express disbelief at the speed of the American movement. They speak of orders that arrive too late, of units that dissolve before contact is even made, of headquarters that lose track of their own formations. This confusion amplifies the effect of Patton's actions far beyond the physical damage inflicted by tanks and artillery. The perception of unstoppable momentum becomes a weapon in itself, accelerating the collapse Patton has been seeking since crossing the Rhine. Within Allied ranks, however, the same momentum creates anxiety. Junior officers worry about overextension. Engineers warn of bridges held by thin screens of infantry. Medical units struggle to evacuate wounded over increasingly long distances. The successes that dominate situation reports conceal a daily grind of exhaustion and risk. Patton's command style demands constant forward motion, leaving little room for consolidation or rest. For many soldiers, the war feels as intense in its final weeks as it did during the bloodiest earlier campaigns. Eisenhower's response evolves cautiously. Rather than issuing a direct order to halt Patton, a move that could provoke confrontation or damage morale, he chooses to shape the advance indirectly. Boundaries between armies are adjusted. Objectives are clarified after they are already reached. Air support is allocated in ways that both enable Patton and limit how far he can realistically go without coordination. This method allows Eisenhower to reassert control without openly challenging Patton's authority or undermining his battlefield achievements. The dynamic between the two commanders becomes a study in restrained tension. Eisenhower understands Patton's value and recognizes that his aggressiveness is contributing materially to Germany's collapse. At the same time, he remains acutely aware that victory achieved through disunity could poison the post-war order the Allies are already planning. Patton, sensing both approval and constraint, continues to operate at the edge of acceptable autonomy, testing how far results can carry him. As April progresses, the strategic implications of Patton's advance grow larger. American forces approach areas designated in Allied agreements for Soviet occupation. Diplomatic considerations, once abstract, now intersect with tank columns on the ground. Eisenhower must balance military opportunity against commitments made to Stalin, commitments essential to maintaining Allied cooperation until Germany's unconditional surrender. Patton's forward movement threatens to complicate these agreements, raising the possibility that battlefield realities could outpace diplomatic arrangements. For Patton, these concerns are secondary. His worldview remains anchored in the belief that decisive military victory creates its own political logic. He argues privately that territory taken and held by American forces should shape post-war outcomes, not lines drawn months earlier on maps. This belief further alarms Allied leaders who fear that unilateral action could fracture the coalition at the very moment unity is most needed. By mid-April 1945, it is clear that Patton's unauthorized advance has become an irreversible factor in the war's final phase. What began as aggressive interpretation of orders has evolved into a driving force, reshaping Allied operations, German collapse, and internal command relationships. Patton is no longer merely a subordinate pushing boundaries. He is a variable that Eisenhower must actively manage, a commander whose actions generate strategic consequences beyond his immediate control. The fear Patton inspires among allies is now tempered by reluctant acceptance. His results are shortening the war, reducing organized German resistance, and accelerating the end of large-scale combat in the West. Yet the cost of this success is an enduring lesson in coalition warfare, that individual brilliance unchecked can strain even the strongest alliances. As Germany's defeat draws closer, Patton's advance stands as both a triumph of momentum and a warning about the delicate balance between initiative and obedience in modern war. As the front lines push deeper into German territory, the nature of the fighting subtly changes, even as the tempo remains relentless. Organized resistance fades unevenly, replaced by fragments of once coherent units acting on instinct rather than command. Patton's armored columns encounter stretches of road where white flags hang from buildings and civilians stand silently at the roadside, followed only miles later by sudden ambushes from anti-tank guns manned by soldiers who no longer expect reinforcement or relief. This unpredictability reinforces Patton's conviction that hesitation is more dangerous than speed, that stopping invites the enemy time to think, regroup, and harden. Inside Third Army headquarters, the operational map becomes increasingly crowded with handwritten notes and improvised symbols. Standard planning cycles have collapsed under the pace of events. Staff officers track advances in hours rather than days, adjusting axes of movement on the fly as new opportunities appear. The traditional hierarchy of planning gives way to rapid decision-making driven by fragmentary reports and intuition shaped by months of combat. Every decision carries risk, but in Patton's command climate, delay is treated as the greatest risk of all. The burden of this philosophy falls heavily on subordinate commanders. Division and regimental leaders are forced to make independent judgments far beyond what doctrine normally allows. Radio traffic crackles constantly with requests for clarification that Patton often answers with blunt encouragement rather than detailed instruction. He expects his commanders to act to exploit, to trust their instincts under pressure. Those who hesitate are quickly replaced, reinforcing a culture where initiative is not merely encouraged but demanded. German command structures continue to unravel under this pressure. Orders issued from Berlin or regional headquarters arrive too late or are ignored entirely. Communications infrastructure collapses as Allied air power dominates the skies, severing telephone lines and destroying rail junctions. Even when German commanders attempt coordinated withdrawals, Patton's speed repeatedly turns retreat into encirclement. Units attempting to fall back find American armor already astride their routes, forcing surrender or chaotic breakout attempts that rarely succeed. The psychological weight of inevitability grows heavier with each passing day. Prisoners speak openly of the war being lost, of fighting only because there is nowhere else to go. Civilians, caught between advancing Allied forces and retreating German units, experience the war's end not as a moment of relief, but as a prolonged state of uncertainty. Patton's troops move through towns where authority has vanished, leaving soldiers to improvise security, order, and basic administration while continuing to advance. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower studies these developments with a mixture of admiration and concern. Reports from intelligence officers confirm that German resistance in Patton's sector is collapsing faster than anticipated. At the same time, diplomatic cables from London and Moscow underscore the sensitivity of Allied coordination as victory approaches. Eisenhower recognizes that battlefield success cannot be separated from political consequence. Every mile gained by Patton carries implications that extend beyond military maps into post-war negotiations already taking shape. Efforts to rein Patton in become more subtle and more urgent. Directives are framed in terms of coordination rather than restriction, emphasizing the need to maintain contact with adjacent armies and respect agreed operational boundaries. Air support priorities are adjusted to channel Patton's momentum along lines that serve broader Allied objectives. These measures are designed to guide rather than halt, acknowledging that an outright stop would squander the very advantage Patton has created. Patton, aware of these pressures, adapts without fundamentally changing his approach. He interprets guidance aggressively, aligning his movements just enough to remain within acceptable limits while continuing to press forward wherever space allows. His correspondence reflects both confidence and impatience, emphasizing enemy collapse and the moral obligation to end the war as quickly as possible. To Patton, every restriction feels like a missed chance to save lives by shortening the conflict. As April draws toward its end, the operational environment grows increasingly complex. American forces encounter liberated prisoners, forced laborers, and concentration camp survivors whose conditions reveal the full scope of Nazi crimes. These discoveries impose new responsibilities on advancing units, slowing movement and demanding resources for medical care and security. The war is no longer only about defeating an enemy army. It is about confronting the consequences of that army's actions. For Patton's soldiers, the emotional impact of these encounters lingers even as orders push them onward. The tension between speed and responsibility sharpens. Commanders must balance Patton's relentless drive with the moral and logistical realities unfolding behind the front. Eisenhower watches closely, understanding that how the Allies conduct themselves in these final weeks will shape the legitimacy of victory itself. Patton's advance, once defined purely by operational daring, now intersects with questions of justice, governance, and historical reckoning. By the final days before Germany's surrender, Patton's unauthorized advance has permanently altered perceptions within the Allied command. He is feared not only for his battlefield effectiveness, but for his willingness to challenge limits imposed by coalition warfare. His actions demonstrate how quickly momentum can outpace planning, forcing leaders to react rather than direct. The success achieved comes with an unspoken acknowledgement that such freedom cannot become the norm without risking chaos. The armies continue to move, orders continue to evolve, and decisions made under immense pressure ripple outward into consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield. Patton's story, shaped by speed, defiance, and results, remains intertwined with the broader narrative of a coalition struggling to end a devastating war while preparing for an uncertain peace.